I'm going a little out of order here because I'm going to pursue some of the things that you were just talking to Mr. Fry about and remind you about your confirmation hearing. At your confirmation hearing in January, you said under oath, and I quote, "There will be no politicization at the FBI. There will be no retributive actions taken by the FBI should I be confirmed." And in your written response to the Senate questionnaire, you said, I quote, "Personnel decisions shall be based on performance and adherence to the law, and every FBI employee will be held to the absolute same standard, and no one will be terminated for case assignments." So I want to just go through a couple scenarios with you to get a sense of whether you think these are examples of politicization of the FBI or making decisions based on the performance and adherence to the law.
Explain this all now. Picture the scene inside a tense House Judiciary Committee hearing room, cameras rolling live. FBI Director Kash Patel seated at the witness table under oath. Across from him, Representative Deborah Ross holds her notes and begins to speak with calm precision. She starts by reading his own sworn statements from his confirmation hearing just months earlier, word for word. Then she lays the receipts on the table. She names senior FBI officials. She references an active lawsuit. She asks pointed questions about whether agents were questioned on their voting history and whether experienced leaders were removed after working cases that drew political attention. You can feel the weight in the room as Patel responds. He cites ongoing litigation. He states the FBI does not terminate anyone based solely on case assignments. But Ross continues, methodically connecting his past promises to the real-world actions now being challenged. Because here is what Kash Patel swore under oath during his confirmation: there will be no politicization at the FBI. There will be no retributive actions taken by the FBI should I be confirmed. He further promised that personnel decisions would be based on performance and adherence to the law, and that no FBI employee would be terminated for the cases they were assigned to investigate. Moments later in that same hearing, Ross confronts him directly with specific names and details drawn from a lawsuit filed by longtime FBI veterans. She brings up Brian Driscoll, a nearly 20-year veteran who earned the Medal of Valor for his bravery during a dangerous ISIS raid and once led the Bureau's critical incident response group. She mentions Stephen Jensen, who spent nearly 2 decades running major terrorism, counterintelligence, and organized crime operations, and she references Walter Giardina, a decorated combat veteran with decades of service who worked on sensitive investigations. As the questions unfold, a clear pattern starts to take shape. Questions about political leanings during interviews, questions about removals following high-profile cases, questions that test whether the promises made under oath are holding up in practice. This exchange carries heavy stakes for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an institution whose effectiveness depends on the trust that it serves the law, not any one administration or political figure. Today, we break down the full exchange step by step. We examine the explosive lawsuit behind these claims, the decorated agents at the center of it, the specific allegations of what happened inside the Bureau, and why this moment exposes a serious contradiction between what was promised and what appears to have taken place. The issues raised here reach well beyond one committee room. They go to the core of how the FBI is led, how personnel decisions are made at the highest levels, and whether the Bureau can truly remain independent when pressure from any direction grows intense. With the foundation of Kash Patel's own promises now clearly established, the real confrontation unfolded inside the House Judiciary Committee hearing room. Representative Deborah Ross wasted no time moving from general principles to direct questioning. She began with a measured but pointed question. Ross asked whether hiring FBI agents, analysts, and supervisors from only one political party would amount to politicization of the FBI, or whether it would simply be considered a normal personnel decision based on performance and adherence to the law. Director Patel responded by stating that the FBI does not ask applicants about their political party affiliation. He emphasized that such questions are not part of the Bureau's standard hiring process. But Ross did not stop at the general answer. She immediately pivoted, sharpening her focus. She asked directly, "Do you ask FBI applicants who they voted for?" Before Patel could fully develop his response, Ross brought the question out of the hypothetical and into the concrete. She referenced the federal lawsuit filed by former acting FBI Director Brian Driscoll against Kash Patel and the FBI. According to the lawsuit, during his interview process under the new administration, Driscoll was allegedly asked about his political leanings and who he had voted for in the last 5 elections. At this point, Director Patel paused and replied carefully. He stated that because that matter was part of ongoing litigation, he was not able to comment on the specifics of the case. Representative Ross seized on the response. She noted that by declining to address the allegation due to the lawsuit, Patel was effectively distancing himself from what the plaintiffs claimed had occurred in Driscoll's situation. Without raising her voice or showing visible emotion, Ross moved smoothly to her next question. She asked, "Does firing agents for working on the cases that they were assigned to, cases that the president did not like, constitute politicization of the FBI? Or does it fall under legitimate personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law?" Director Patel answered by saying the FBI does not terminate anyone based on case assignments alone. Ross pressed further. She inquired whether the FBI had ever been sued by someone who felt they were terminated based on the cases they had worked. When Patel noted that such lawsuits had likely occurred across the long history of the Bureau, Ross narrowed the time frame. She asked specifically, "Has that happened since your tenure as director?" Patel again referenced the likelihood of ongoing litigation. Ross confirmed that yes, in fact, there was ongoing litigation, and that individuals had reportedly been asked about their voting history. Throughout this entire exchange, Ross maintained a calm, surgical style. She did not interrupt aggressively or raise her tone. Instead, she moved deliberately from broad hypothetical questions to specific documented cases. She laid out the sequence step by step, using Patel's own confirmation promises as the measuring stick for each new point. By the time this portion of the questioning concluded, the central tension of the hearing had become unmistakable. The gap between the clear promises made under oath in January 2025 and the real-world personnel decisions being challenged just months later. As the hearing progressed, Representative Deborah Ross moved from general questions into the heart of the matter. She began naming specific individuals and laying out the details from a lawsuit filed in September 2025 by several longtime FBI officials against Director Kash Patel and the FBI. This complaint, known as Driscoll et al. Versus Patel, forms the core of the allegations Ross presented during the hearing. First, she focused on Brian Driscoll Jr. Driscoll had served nearly 20 years in the FBI. He had risen to the position of acting director and previously led the Bureau's Critical Incident Response Group, one of the most demanding units responsible for handling major crises and high-risk operations. He was a recipient of the Medal of Valor for his bravery during a dangerous ISIS raid. According to the lawsuit, when the Trump administration interviewed Driscoll for his role, he was allegedly questioned extensively about his political leanings and specifically who he had voted for in the last 5 presidential elections. Driscoll reportedly refused to answer those questions, believing they were inappropriate and politicized the process. Shortly afterward, he was removed from his position through a single-page letter invoking Article 2 authority. No detailed explanation of performance issues was provided in that letter. Next, Ross turned to Stephen Jensen. Jensen had dedicated almost 2 decades to the FBI, serving in critical leadership roles within the Washington field office. He oversaw major investigations involving terrorism, counterintelligence, and organized crime. In the past, Jensen had received praise from senior leadership, including comments that described him as someone who embodied the professionalism the American public expects from the FBI. However, according to the allegations, Jensen was removed after his involvement in investigations related to the events of January 6th. The lawsuit claims this decision came amid significant external pressure from political supporters who publicly criticized his continued presence in the Bureau. Ross also highlighted the case of Walter Giardina, a decorated combat veteran who had spent decades with the FBI. Giardina brought extensive operational experience to the table. He had worked on the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and had been involved in the case involving Trump ally Peter Navarro. The lawsuit alleges that Giardina was targeted for removal following public pressure on social media, and that some supervisors initially resisted firing him without following proper internal processes. What makes these cases particularly striking is the pattern they appear to form. In each instance, the individuals involved had long careers marked by significant achievements, high-level operational responsibilities, medals for valor, and deep institutional knowledge. Brian Driscoll with his Medal of Valor and crisis leadership experience, Stephen Jensen with his expertise across terrorism and counterintelligence, Walter Giardina as a combat veteran with decades of service. Yet, according to the lawsuit, their experience and records seem to have been overshadowed by perceived political sensitivity tied to the cases they had worked on in previous years. The lawsuit provides additional context that Ross drew upon. It alleges that Director Patel told Brian Driscoll directly that these firings were being directed from above because the FBI tried to put the president in jail and he hasn't forgotten it. The complaint further claims that Patel's own position as director depended on successfully carrying out these personnel changes. The plaintiffs argue that these actions violated basic due process protections, infringed on First Amendment rights regarding political beliefs and associations, and breached long-standing FBI rules meant to prevent politicization within the Bureau. It is important to note that these claims remain allegations contained in active litigation. The cases are still working their way through the courts, and Director Patel has not been found liable. However, in the hearing, Ross used the filed lawsuit and the specific details within it as powerful evidence to challenge whether the director was living up to the clear commitments he made under oath only months earlier. By naming these individuals and walking through their records of service alongside the allegations of how they were removed, Ross painted a picture of a systematic shift, a pattern in which years of operational expertise, bravery under fire, and institutional memory were being set aside when those same individuals became politically inconvenient. What made this particular exchange between Representative Deborah Ross and FBI Director Kash Patel so damaging goes well beyond the surface-level back and forth in the hearing room. At its core, it exposed deeper structural and institutional risks that reach far inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Politicization inside a powerful agency like the FBI does not always arrive in the form of one dramatic mass purge that makes headlines overnight. More often, it takes shape gradually through a series of individual personnel decisions that, when viewed together, begin to send a very clear and unmistakable message throughout every level of the Bureau. That message can be simple yet powerful. Your career trajectory may depend less on the quality of your investigations and more on whether the cases you worked on are politically favorable or unfavorable to the current administration. When senior leaders with decades of hands-on experience are removed, something critical starts to fade. Institutional memory, the deep reservoir of knowledge, context, and hard-earned lessons that only comes from years of working complex cases, begins to erode. Seasoned experts who have led major terrorism investigations, managed high-stakes counterintelligence operations, responded to international crises, and earned medals for valor under fire are gradually replaced by newer personnel who may be more aligned with the current leadership's priorities. Over time, this shift can change the culture of the entire organization. The risk extends beyond internal morale. In national security and law enforcement work, hesitation can carry serious consequences. Agents and analysts who worry that their future depends on political calculations may become more cautious in pursuing difficult cases. They may second-guess pursuing leads that could later prove politically sensitive. They may hesitate to provide candid assessments to leadership. In an agency entrusted with protecting the country from terrorism, espionage, cyber threats, and violent crime, even small degrees of hesitation or self-censorship can weaken operational effectiveness at the moments when clarity and boldness are most needed. What gave Representative Deborah Ross's questioning its particular force was her approach. She did not rely heavily on partisan rhetoric or emotional accusations. Instead, she used Kash Patel's own confirmation record as the primary measuring stick. By reading his sworn promises back to him, the commitments to eliminate politicization, reject retributive actions, and base all personnel decisions strictly on performance and adherence to the law, she created a direct test. When she later declared that Director Patel had flunked his own test, the statement carried more weight precisely because the standard had been written by Patel himself, not by his critics. The exchange also raised broader concerns that have been quietly circulating inside and outside the Bureau. Questions about leadership stability have grown as multiple high-level officials have been replaced in a relatively short period. Some current and former agents have expressed alarm that the rapid turnover at senior levels could disrupt ongoing operations and damage the FBI's ability to function as a professional, nonpartisan institution. At stake is a fundamental principle: whether the FBI exists to serve the Constitution and the American people equally under the law, or whether it risks becoming more responsive to the priorities and grievances of any single administration. Director Kash Patel set the standard himself. During his confirmation process, he promised equal application of the law, no retaliation for case assignments, and no politicization at the FBI. Representative Deborah Ross methodically laid out the receipts and showed point by point where the actions taken under his leadership appeared to diverge sharply from those sworn promises. She quoted his exact words. She tested them against real cases. She named Brian Driscoll, Stephen Jensen, and Walter Giardina, men with long distinguished careers, medals for valor, and deep operational expertise. Through the details of the September 2025 lawsuit and the questions asked in that hearing room, Ross built a case that these experienced agents were removed not primarily for performance failures, but because of their connection to investigations that carried political weight. Whether you see these personnel changes as necessary reform to correct past imbalances, or as dangerous retribution that risks undermining the Bureau's independence, one thing is now clear: the contradiction is on the public record. The promises made under oath in January 2025 have been placed directly beside the decisions made after Kash Patel took office as FBI director. The American people can see the gap for themselves. This hearing reminds us why congressional oversight exists in the first place. It is not to manage the day-to-day operations of the FBI, but to protect the long-term integrity of vital national institutions. When solemn promises made under oath appear to clash with decisions carried out on the ground, Americans deserve clear, detailed, and honest answers. Not deflections behind ongoing litigation, but substantive explanations that restore confidence in the rule of law and the impartiality of federal law enforcement. The FBI is not the personal agency of any president or political party. It belongs to the Constitution and to the people it is sworn to serve and protect. Its strength has always depended on agents knowing that their loyalty to the law will not cost them their careers when political winds shift. The questions raised in this exchange, about voting inquiries, about the removal of decorated veterans, about the pattern of decisions, go to the heart of whether that principle is being upheld. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe this is legitimate accountability and reform, or is it overreach that threatens the FBI's independence? Be respectful, but be honest with your views. If you want more detailed, in-depth breakdowns of FBI oversight hearings, future developments in this case, and clear analysis of what is really happening inside our federal law enforcement agencies, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Share this video with others if you believe the public deserves the full context and not just the headlines. Thank you for watching. Let's keep demanding transparency and holding those in power to the promises they make under oath. Until next time, stay informed and stay vigilant.